Well, I have some things to share this morning, and I pray that it's beneficial. We started last week with the currency of life. And we talked about this idea looking at the first stage of manifestation, the seed stage. And I said that for us on the mental level, the seeds of our life are our ideas and our choices. And the last thing I said in the sermon last week was that the interesting thing about the way the seed works is as much as the seed has so much power and potential and capability, and yet the seed has to surrender to the soil and to the sun. And so that takes us into the next stage. But one other thing that I said there that's important, and I'll probably come back to this each week, as we're looking at this series, the seed, the soil, the tree, the fruit, making sense of manifestation, we're doing a couple things with this series. First, it enables us, as we look at each stage, to identify which stage we're currently in, related to a desired manifestation. This will also enable us to learn how to maximize and appreciate the good in every stage. And it will support us in experimenting with the process of manifestation to examine our results and then tweak or modify as needed. So the soil stage, what I thought about is something that when I was a kid, I had my grandparents, my maternal grandparents were in Maryland, my paternal grandparents were in New Jersey. And so my sister and I split our time between the grandparents in the summer. And my maternal grandparents, my mom's mom, my grandmother, she was a gardener. Of course, they grew up in the South and grew up on the farm and had all of that skill and knowledge. But she also maintained a garden up until the last years of her life. She maintained gardens at home, but then she also was a part of a community garden. And so that meant that every summer we had, tomatoes and cucumbers and zucchinis and all kind of wonderful things, right? And I'm grateful that I got the appreciation of what fresh food tastes like and having access to fresh produce, right? Beautiful. So being inspired by my grandmother as a little 6-year-old boy in the summer, and one of my favorite fruits are oranges. I love citrus fruits in general, but I had an orange, and I'm like, well, supposedly the way this thing works is you can take a seed, put it in the ground, and I'm gonna have my oranges just like grandma has her tomatoes, right? So in my grandparents' backyard, there was a swing set, and at the end of the sliding board, because we used it so much, the grass wasn't growing there anymore. It was just like dirt from us constantly landing there. So I was like, this is the perfect spot. It's open, there's no grass there. So I'm gonna take my little orange seeds and I'm gonna dig up the ground and plant my orange seeds. And I'm gonna have oranges, right? So, I told my grandmother about it and she chuckled and she thought it was cute. And every day I kept, checking, to see, not digging it up, but checking, making sure that it was coming. I was happy on the days that it rained because I was like, that this rain is helping my little orange seed. Well, needless to say, there has yet to be an orange tree at that spot at my grandparents' house, right? And when I think about that story, it's interesting because it tells us so much, because many times as we are creating mentally, we have the seeds, right? We have the ideas, we have the choices, but we actually don't have the right soil or the right conditions in order for that thing to emerge. It's not that that orange seed didn't have the capability and potential to become an orange tree, sprout orange blossoms, and then eventually oranges, but at the end of the sliding board in Silver Spring, Maryland, it wasn't gonna happen. It didn't have the right conditions, right? And so, as we're looking at nature and we're looking at how nature can teach us, I want to take us back, as you already heard it in the series description, that we're anchoring this on the principle of correspondence. And the principle of correspondence says, as above, so below. As below, so above. Now, this is not a metaphor, right? When we're using nature, we're not saying, oh, it's sort of like this. That's not what we're saying. What the principle of correspondence teaches us is that at every level of existence, the true principles are always true at every layer. So if it's true, as we look at the seed, the soil, the tree, the fruit, and we can understand that process, then it must happen and work the same way on the mental and spiritual plane. So we're not just saying that, oh, this is just a nice way to understand it. We're saying that this is how it is. That's what the principle of correspondence teaches us. There's a direct correspondence, a direct correlation. And so as we think about that and think about the soil, I want to talk a little bit about soil and the health of soil and the quality of soil and what fertile soil looks like, because as we understand that, then that'll help us as we're thinking about a fertile mind. So the definition of soil health or fertile soil, we read this: the capacity of a soil to function within ecosystems and land use applications that can sustain productivity, maintain environmental quality, and promote plant and animal health, okay? Healthy soil, fertile soil, sustains productivity, maintains environmental quality, and it promotes plant and animal health. Now we go a little further. If we want to look at the characteristics of healthy soil or fertile soil, we read this. First, it has good soil tilth. It's a nice word. I've learned about tilth. It's a wonderful word. And what tilth is all about is the soil actually being suitable for seeds to be sown into. That's what tilth is. It's interesting. Soil actually has to be suitable. It has to have good tilth for seeds to even be sown into it. It also has to have sufficient depth, because we recognize that there are some plants and some trees that grow massive root systems deep and wide, and if the soil doesn't have the right depth, it actually can't handle the seed that is being sown into it. That's already preaching by itself. Lord have mercy. Right? Now, healthy soil also has proper levels of nutrients. It also has good drainage. This is interesting because, you can overwater a plant, right? And what happens if it doesn't have good drainage, you drown the roots. The very thing that enables the tree or the fruit or that plant to actually grow and sustain and continue to sustain its life, it can be drowned if the soil doesn't have good drainage. Also, healthy soil has large populations of beneficial organisms. It has a resistance to weeds and degradation. And finally, it is resilient when unfavorable conditions occur. I could just sit down right now. But now let's look at, because it's important, so we're talking about what healthy and fertile soil is, then we also should look at what does poor quality soil look like. Right, so poor quality soils are the result of soil compaction. So when soil is compacted too much, then that's when it doesn't have the tilth that's required. It's actually not suitable for sowing seeds, and then it also doesn't have the sufficient depth. Surface crusting is the same thing. This is what leads us into the poor drainage problems that drowns the root systems. If it has low organic matter or minerals, it is poor soil. And then if there's increased pressure from diseases, weeds, and insects, and finally, if there's a lack of beneficial organisms, then we have what's called poor soil. So as we hear this, we hear what healthy or fertile soil is, and we hear what poor or unhealthy soil is. Just turn to your neighbor and ask, do you have a fertile mind? Do you have a fertile mind? Because we recognize that it's our mind that is the soil. Now, last week we talked about this. This is the other anchoring principle that we have to look at, is the principle of gender in the Kabbalion. Kabbalion says gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. Gender manifests on all planes. No creation, physical, mental, or spiritual, is possible without this principle. So on the physical level, the seed and the soil, the seed is the masculine, as we talked about last week, and the soil is the feminine, which we're talking about this week. Now, the Kabbalion goes on to talk about this feminine principle, as we understand that that's what the soil is. The Kabbalion says that the feminine principle is the one always doing the active, creative work, and this is so on all planes. And yet, each principle is incapable of operative energy without the assistance of the other. So what's interesting about this, as even last week as we talked about the seed, I touched on the soil a little bit, but I was trying not to get too deep into it. But as we continue to move forward, it's actually impossible to really completely talk about the seed without also talking about the soil. In the same way, it's actually impossible for me to completely talk about the soil without talking about the seed. Why? Because each principle is incapable of operative energy without the assistance of the other. Now, I just want to say this one little thing as it relates to our lives now, and we think about the dance of the masculine and the feminine, right? Because as we are seeing and witnessing, and it's beautiful that the rise of the feminine and the rise of the divine feminine, if we simply replace toxic masculinity with divine femininity, we've still lost. Each is incapable of operative energy without the assistance of the other. So where we are striving, what we are moving towards is healthy masculinity and healthy femininity, working together to create a healthy world, right? That's what we're after. And so when we understand this feminine principle at the level of mind, the feminine principle of mind corresponds to, we can call it deeper mind, we can call it the subjective mind, the subconscious mind, the involuntary mind, the passive mind. And so the tendency of the feminine principle, the Kabbalion says, is always in the direction of receiving impressions. The soil receives seed. And here's what's interesting. Now, provided they're the right conditions, because, I put my orange seed in the soil and was like, yeah, you can plant it if you want. I can't do anything with it, right? But with the right conditions, that soil is going to bring forth that fruit easily and effortlessly, right? It doesn't judge, well, I don't know if I really want to have oranges where I am. Like, that's not what the soil does. The soil is not, well, apples, really? That's what you want? Really? The soil never does that. Vegetables? Right? It doesn't do any of that. It simply takes the seed and it allows the information that is in the seed. And again, as the Kabbalion says so wonderfully, that the feminine principle is the one always doing the active creative work, and this is so on all planes. That's what it does. It goes to work. It begins to do the active creative work. Now we go a little further and we understand that one of the ways for us to understand this seed and soil representation, the Kabbalion is very brilliant here. It talks about the I as the masculine and the me as the feminine. And we read this: there is this dual aspect in the mind of every person. The I represents the masculine principle of mental gender, and the me represents the feminine principle. The I represents the aspect of being, and the me represents the aspect of becoming. And so there's always this potential within us to become something more. Now, the me, when we think about ourselves, right, what we describe as me are usually our habits, our emotions, our career, those things that make up who we are. But if we think about it, our me is changeable. Who you described as me when you were 5, and who you described yourself as me when you were 13, and who you described yourself as me when you were 21 are all different people, technically, right? Because the me is changeable. And this is interesting when we think about the feminine in general and why it's so important. Pastor Yolanda and I, we love the relationship work of Allison Armstrong. And one of the things that Allison talks about in her work is this idea that the feminine instinct is highly adaptable. And one of the things that I found that's interesting, that you hear it sometimes, but you rarely hear this from men, but I hear it all the time from women. This idea of losing yourself in a relationship. And what this points to, again, as we understand that this correspondence, this principle is happening everywhere, it's this understanding that the soil becomes whatever is present based on whatever the I is, right? Now, as each of us contain these principles, each of us are operating in this way, and we're going to go a layer deeper with this. And so if there is no I that is affirmative, if there is no I that's constructive, and if you are not in control of your I, the seed, the choice, the idea, then the soil, that is you, is going to inevitably take whatever seeds are coming from the external and give birth to it easily and effortlessly. And one of the things I began to think about, it's interesting as we look at movements on this planet and a massive change that has happened on this planet. One of the reasons why change doesn't always happen in the way that we would desire it, it is because the world, the masses, are living in me consciousness. They're living in this receptive consciousness, and so whatever Facebook says, I guess that's what it is. Whatever this news reporter says, I guess that's what it is. Whatever this person who I've given, put up above me or higher than me says, then that's what it is. And so we're in this me consciousness, and then that's what we create from. But And every time that there's been massive change, and when we look at the movements that have happened across this planet, it was the point at which the people, the masses, took control of their I again and said, no, wait. I am a man. I am a man. No, I am worthy. No, I am a full human being. No, I am capable of doing this thing. No, I am capable of having this thing. No, I am worthy. At every point, you can look at any social movement on this planet across time. They finally took control of their I and spoke to the me within them and gave birth to a new experience. It was never that it was never that the so-called power changed, right? Power conceded to the power of the masses. But as long as the masses lived in that me consciousness, there was nothing to concede to. So again, we have this idea of understanding what's going on with the feminine and what's going on with the masculine and what's going on with the soil. So let's go back and look at these characteristics. As we talked about the characteristics of healthy soil, let's look at what the characteristics of a fertile mind is. Soil tilth. Love that word. So if we think about tilth on the mental plane, that would mean that then we would need to be receptive to new ideas. We would need to be receptive to new choices. We would need to be receptive to new ways of seeing and new ways of being. One of the things that I'm seeing right now, which is interesting as we look at the Green New Deal, for instance. What's happening right now is the soil tilth in mass consciousness ain't really good right now. It's not really good right now. And so we have many of our leaders and our veteran politicians, they can't really see how any other way is possible. We have our dear sister Dianne Feinstein, God bless her, she's done so many things in this country, but she's speaking down to the young people like, no, you don't really understand how this works. No, it doesn't work that way. Meanwhile, we are in a critical point in history where it's time to develop some good soil tilth so that we can be receptive to these new ideas, new choices, ways of seeing, and ways of being. Sufficient depth. I like this one. Sufficient depth. Does the seed, does the idea, does the choice have a place to rest and transform? And what's interesting about this, and so many of these are interrelated, but when we think about the sufficient depth, when we PY and I were just talking about this yesterday. We were talking about Facebook. And we were talking about fake news and you know, so many of these posts, you know, they're bait posts, right? There'll be a headline that's just designed to just make you like it right away or share it. And most people never read the contents of what's actually going on, right? This is how Russia duped all of us with the previous election. But what I recognize is that sufficient depth, if we are crowding our life and our mind with a whole bunch of stuff, right, that has nothing to do with the life you're seeking to create, that is not constructive, that is not affirmative, that is not the voice of love, that is not any of those, like we crowd ourselves with that. This is the only reason why we do the, you know, media fast in some of our classes. Because we recognize that you come to the class, you come to 4Ts, you come into that class 12 weeks, I want to change consciousness, prosperity consciousness. Well, we got to develop some sufficient depth. And so if you're ingesting all of these eyes from out here, all of these ideas from out here, instead of allowing the idea within you, the God in you, to speak to the me within you, you're not actually going to have the results that you desire. So we recognize that for a few weeks, if you can just fast from media, if you can just detox from some of these things, it's actually going to put you in the place of having a fertile mind and actually being able to have and experience results. The next characteristic of a fertile mind is proper levels of nutrients. And when I hear that, what I think about is first, self-care. Right? How do we right? What does a nutritious mind look like, right? What does nutritious thinking look like? And one of the important things, and you know, we've talked about self-care, and there's a few sermons ago we were talking about that in the Practical Spirituality series, but this is also where meditation is so incredibly important, right? Whatever form of meditation you use, it's incredibly important because what it is doing is literally revitalizing you. And as you contact that level of being, the unified field, you are healing yourself. This is why studies continue to show that meditation can lower cholesterol, meditation can lower your blood pressure. People get off their medication, that meditation leads to awesome heart health. All these things begin to happen. And then what also happens, as the studies are showing, you get smarter. What also happens, as studies are showing, you actually start to reverse your age. With proper levels of nutrients, you can do that. But again, as we go back to this sufficient depth thing, right? But if you're filling your mind and filling your consciousness with things that are not beneficial, then that's not nutritious, right? It's like eating sugar cereal every day, right? I mean, it's food, right? But that's not really going to work out in the long term. Good drainage. Now, as we talked about with the soil in the physical world, good drainage is important because without that, we can drown the roots. Good drainage means that a fertile mind forgives, a fertile mind surrenders, a fertile mind knows how to let go, a fertile mind releases what does not serve it. That's what good drainage looks like for a fertile mind, right? And what I was thinking about here is Abraham Hicks always talks about caring how you feel, right? That you understand that the vibration that you're holding, right? If you're holding a vibration of anger, resentment, jealousy, hate, whatever it may be, or just disgust or annoyance, right? That vibration will attract things that match it, and you will continue to create from it. So when you care about how you feel, it's like, whoa, I gotta let this annoyance drain. I gotta let this out. I'm not drowning my roots. Right, when you understand what roots are, and I invite you, if you haven't seen it, we at the POT conference this past summer, we shared the video on Facebook. My talk was all about roots, when the roots are deep. When I talked about, some of the metaphors of roots, and bamboo is a wonderful metaphor of roots. But when we understand what our roots are and what's necessary, and this even goes back to the meditation and the self-care, because I love how Maharishi Mahesh Yogi talks about this in TM, that one of the mantras or mottos is water the root, enjoy the fruit, right? And when we think about the process of meditation, now if you had a plant or a tree that you saw was dying, you saw that the leaves were turning brown, would you pour water on the leaves? I mean, on one level, that kind of seems to make sense, like this brown leaf, I want it to change, so let me do something to the leaf. But actually, that's not how the leaf will become nourished. That's not how the leaf will move from death to life. You have to water its roots. And the root system then nourishes, it has knowledge and changes that water and the sun and the nutrients of the soil into food, into energy, into life, and can turn that brown leaf green. Yes, yes? So it is the same truth with us, right? That when we understand the power of our roots, one, this is why we meditate, but also we understand that then we got to have good drainage for our roots. Because if we don't have good drainage for our roots, and we're holding on to unforgiveness, and we're holding on to hate, and we're holding on to an old story, and we're holding on to the shoulds, and all of that stuff, we are starting to choke our roots, the very thing that will nourish the external you, which are the leaves. The next characteristic of a fertile mind. A fertile mind has large populations of beneficial and constructive thoughts, affirmations, and mental programs installed in the subconscious. So this is why we affirm and use affirmations daily. Again, in the 4T's Prosperity Program, one of your assignments from day one is to affirm, I am prosperous 100 times in the morning, and I am prosperous 100 times in the evening. And what is that doing? It's doing this very thing. And this is why, again, all of these steps are about creating and developing and maintaining a fertile mind. So if we have large populations of beneficial and constructive thoughts in our mind, if we have a large population of beneficial and constructive affirmations and beneficial and constructive mental programs, and this is what's interesting when we think about mental programs, what that simply means is that it's an automatic way of being. You just do it and you don't even think about it. And that's the point that we want to get to, that even when somebody, say you set an appointment with somebody and they don't show up, your immediate mental program says, oh, something must have happened. I hope they're all right. But But you might remember the time when your mental program was, they don't respect me, they don't respect my time. They couldn't even call, they just texted me, right? That's a mental program too. But when we start to install beneficial and constructive and loving mental programs, then all of a sudden that automatic thought, it just moves us to a place, oh, well, I hope they're all right, I hope everything's okay, or all is well, we'll get together, it's all good, right? That's what starts to happen when we have those mental programs. It becomes, again, our automatic response, just in the same way that you don't think about tying your shoe, you just, before you think about it, you're doing it. But that wasn't always the case. That was a mental program that was installed in your mind as a child and learning how to tie your shoes. It's the same thing with this new thought stuff. And so when we have the large populations of beneficial and constructive thoughts, affirmations, and mental programs installed, then our fertile mind has developed a resistance to thoughts of lack, resistance to thoughts of limitation, resistance to thoughts of worry, doubt, unworthiness, and fear. Any thought that is destructive, we've developed a resistance to it. We've developed almost like a force field. And the reason why I say that is because sometimes, that word resistance can be problematic because, we're taught to resist in the political sense or in the revolutionary sense. And instead of it being an act, what we do is we develop that resistance that is automatic. It just happens, right? So as we are, I have like 10 thoughts all at once. So what I'm hearing in my mind right now is, growing up in the church, we would hear the old folks, they would pray and they would say, we thank you, Lord, for danger seen and unseen, for protecting us from danger seen and unseen. This is what that resistance develops in us. What begins to happen as you are living in this beneficial, loving, and constructive place, there are things that simply cannot come into your realm of experience by law. That's the law of attraction. Whatever it is that you're thinking about, you're going to attract the things that match that, which means that automatically the things that don't match that stay away from you. So this is why you don't have to resist it in the sense of fighting against it. What you simply do is develop the beneficial and the constructive, and then you automatically have a resistance to those thoughts, to the lack, to the limitation, to the worry, to the doubt. You're immunized by your very own mind. It reminds me, Willis Kinnear in the 30-Day Mental Diet is one of my favorite quotes. He says, I stand guard at the gateway of my mind and entertain only ideas which I desire to have become tangibly manifested. That's how we live. I stand guard at the gateway of my mind. That's that resistance to thought, lack, limitation, worry, doubt, unworthiness, and fear. And so then we have this last one, which is so incredibly important. The characteristics of a fertile mind is resilient when unfavorable conditions occur. This is called unconditional living. If you haven't watched that sermon series, I invite you to go see it, and you should actually start with PY's message, The In-Between. Unconditional living. We will never, in this spiritual center, teach you another version of pie in the sky spirituality that says that, oh, if you affirm and all these things, you're just Teflon and nothing's going to happen to you. Nothing bad will ever occur. We will never teach that. Because we understand the ebbs and flows of life. There will be a time that you will be sad. You will experience the transition of a loved one, the end of a relationship, a job transition. There will be a time where you will be angry. That's true. Anger is wonderful. It's informative. We don't act from anger, but anger is beautiful. It's an emotion just like happiness, right? We recognize that as beings on this planet and on this plane of existence, we will experience unfavorable conditions. But what we teach here, as we understand, and we're talking about unconditional living, we teach how to hold the line and how to keep your mind right in the midst of the unfavorable conditions. And the soil shows us that. The soil is subject to drought. The soil is subject to floods. Two different experiences. The soil is subject to drought. The soil is subject to floods. It's subject to pests and weeds. The soil can have a less productive yield one year, less crops one year versus another. We experience the same thing. We as humans humans are subject to drought. We're subject to floods. We're subject to pests. And we can have a less productive year or a smaller crop. But healthy soil develops a resilience even under unfavorable conditions. And so it's important that as we have a fertile mind, that fertile mind allows us to hold the line. It allows us to stand tall even in the midst of this. Why? Because we know and we affirm nothing but good can come from this. And so here's my last point. Because as I was thinking about the soil and looking at the qualities and characteristics of healthy soil and soil tilth and all these wonderful things, one of the things that I was thinking about was crop rotation. Y'all know about crop rotation? Yeah. Right? So crop rotation is interesting, and there's kind of a couple different reasons for it. And I'll just read this to you because it's easier than me trying to explain it. The land itself can become tired and less fertile. Right? This is because the same type of crop planted repeatedly in the same area keeps draining the land of the same nutrients needed for that plant's growth. Second, certain pests can reach levels that are hard to control when they learn to make a home near a field that always has the same type of crop. Again, that preaches by itself. See, we get used, well, one of the things I say sometimes in a webinar I did earlier this year, you can get used to anything. And so what starts to happen is we can develop a condition that maybe was good 5 years ago, but now, it's just something we've gotten used to and we're just going by rote. And so what begins to happen is certain pests can reach levels that are hard to control because they learn to make a home near a field that always has the same type of crop. Finally, land can become more susceptible to the forces of erosion if the same type of crop is planted repeatedly season after season. And of course, that takes us back to then we would develop unhealthy soil. So it goes on, it says, crop rotation helps mitigate each of these effects. Different types of plants require different types of nutrients from the soil. So by changing crops routinely, it allows the land to remain fertile, since not all of the same nutrients are being used each season. For example, planting a legume such as soybeans helps to replenish necessary nitrogen in the soil, right? That particular legume, soybeans, doesn't need nitrogen, so then the nitrogen is replenished. So then when you plant another plant the next year that actually needs nitrogen, it's going to have enough. And so as I was contemplating this, crop rotation, what is the wisdom from the soil? What is the wisdom of the soil in crop rotation? And what I began to hear is this. So often, and particularly if you're in classes or you're working through something, you may be doing forgiveness work. We believe in forgiveness work here at CSC. We believe in our worksheets, right? Radical forgiveness and radical self-forgiveness, Colin Tipping. And what I want you to understand is that when you're doing that forgiveness work, you may be doing it around a previous relationship. You and your former partner, spouse, lover broke up, things weren't good, things didn't end well, and you may hold some resentment, or you may not have shown up as your best self in that relationship, and so you're holding some self-guilt and unforgiveness towards self. And so you're doing that work. And what I want you to understand is that that work, as you're working on this thing around your relationship, your romantic relationship, it's more beneficial than you think. Now, yes, it's true. It may bring a new love into your life, but what it is also doing is cultivating the nutrients of healing, forgiveness, clarity, worthiness, fearlessness, and power that will support you in the other crops that you're seeking to grow. See, many times we get so hung up, you're like, Pastor Yolanda, do I really have to keep dealing with this relationship stuff? Pastor Yolanda, Pastor Greg, do I still have to keep forgiving my ex, old ex? Do I have to keep going way back? Pastor Greg, Pastor Yolanda, do I have to keep working on forgiveness stuff related to my family or related to my parents? Yes, but why? Because I know you want the money. I know you want that business to thrive. I know you want that trip. I know you want that car. I know you want that house. But as you do the forgiveness work around this crop, what begins to happen is you are developing the nutrients. You are developing the healing. You are developing the worthiness. You are developing the fearlessness that is needed for the house, that is needed for the car, that is needed for the new relationship, that is needed for the healed family relationship, that is needed for you to walk fearlessly on this earth. And so the wisdom is right here in the soil. Whatever it is, So know that as you're doing this work, and this is why it's important to focus on one thing. One thing, y'all. I know it's tempting. I know we have a lot of stuff that we want. But if you understand from this perspective that if you're focusing on one thing and doing your work around this one thing, what you're doing in your soil is developing the nutrients that make the next thing so much easier, and it begins to automatically show up. You work on your relationship and all of a sudden your money gets better. You work on your relationship with self and all of a sudden job opportunities start coming. You work on your relationship with self and all of a sudden you get more dates than you ever had before. That's why. That's why. And so once you've worked that thing and worked it and you're living magnificently, the only thing you need to do to maintain that crop is stay in gratitude around it. You maintain that vibration of gratitude, and now you go to another area of your mind and start planting new seeds, planting new ideas, planting new choices, and going through the same work. With that, I invite everybody to stand. Mother, Father, God, we are so grateful. We are so thankful for this wisdom. The wisdom of the seed that is surrendered to the soil, and the wisdom, power, possibility, and capability of this soil. We are so grateful for this divine feminine that lives in us. This awesome creative ability and faculty that gives birth to all things, that gives birth to anything. And we are so grateful and thankful for the wisdom of a fertile mind, understanding these characteristics, understanding what is required for a fertile mind. And we are so grateful and thankful for the tools that we possess that allow us to maintain good soil tilth, maintain a mind that is receptive, maintain a mind that is open. We forgive ourselves and we set ourselves free for those moments in our lives where we were fixed and hardened. Crusty ground. We are so grateful and thankful for the water that you are, that softens us again and allows us to be receptive and to develop the depth that is required for these deep roots, because we recognize that the roots that are your roots, God, they run deep, they run wide, they run deep, they run wide. And so as we are open and receptive and softened to receive the seed that you are, Mother, Father, God, the idea, the choice, that knowing within us that says that we are perfect, whole, and complete, that knowing within us that says we can be, do, or have whatever we want, that knowing within us that says we are perfect, whole, and complete, that knowing within us that says we are worthy and will always be worthy, that knowing within us that says whom shall I fear, that knowing within us, we open our hearts and our minds and we receive it. And as we receive it, we do our work to make sure that this soil receives and maintains the nutrients that are required. As we receive it, we do our work to maintain resistance to that which does not serve us. We do our work to maintain that fearlessness, and we run to forgiveness, and we run to dropping the story. And we maintain that resilience, knowing that nothing but good can come from this. When the weeds show up, we don't lose our minds. When the rabbits show up and the other critters show up, we don't freak out. We affirm that nothing but good can come from this, and we affirm that all is absolutely well in truth. And so with joy and thanksgiving, I now release this prayer. Grateful to be here with these fertile minds. Grateful to be here in a time and place in time of fertile minds, as we are opening ourselves up to new ideas, to transform, to maintain, to sustain, and to heal our planet. For this truth, I am so very grateful. I release this prayer right here and right now, and together we say, Amen, Amen. Ashe. And so it is.